Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Lure, and I'm excited to have a gentleman calling in from Utah today here on the phone with me, Mr. Pete Vlastelica. Welcome to the podcast, Pete.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you very much. Looking forward to this, and thanks a lot for your interest.
Yeah, no, let me quickly introduce you to our audience here. Normally you're based in LA. And you are, currently with one of the biggest e-gaming companies or gaming companies on the planet here, with Activision Blizzard. And, but that's where we're going to get to very at the end of it. The conversation is going to be around your amazing career, both from an entrepreneurial point of view and of course also working with very large corporations, in the digital and I would call it media space. And this is really the early part. And then, of course, we're going to do a deep dive into gaming and esports here, especially, what Activision Blizzard does in the esports space, where you were the president and CEO until fairly recently. And so you were very heavily involved in Overwatch League and, of course, the Call of Duty League. So we're going to take a really deep look into the business model there, and really how all these leagues are run compared to a bit, of course, traditional leagues as well. But before we get there, we always love to start at the beginning. And in your case, obviously, you came out of Stanford there, had a couple of internships with Walt Disney, and somehow I think that was sort of also, it looks like your first role there. Talk a bit about it and tell us a bit, how that already ended up you being there in the Walt Disney Internet Company.
Well, let's see. So I was at Stanford in the late 90s, so I graduated Stanford in 1999. And I like to think of Stanford in 1997, 8, 9 as the epicenter in both time and place of this internet revolution, the
right.
boom that led to so many great companies coming out of that part of the world, and so much value being created through this new platform that everyone was so excited about and just getting to know, and right. Where sort of possibilities were unlimited. So I majored.
You were right in the heart of that. That's for sure.
It was kind of an amazing opportunity, and it wasn't really designed that way. I went into Stanford thinking I wanted to be a doctor,
okay.
and pretty quickly sort of fell in love with this internet thing, and pivoted my attention during my time in college toward internet businesses. And so yeah, as you mentioned, I had an opportunity to work at Disney while I was in college on their new internet business, literally brand new. Like it was. The Walt Disney Internet Group didn't exist when I had my first role there. We were sort of writing the plan for it. Right. So I did that for 2 summers and had the opportunity after school to go to London and help open the office there, the kind of international headquarters for the Walt Disney Internet Group. And yeah, wow, what a great way to start my career that was.
Yeah, so at that time it was ESPN.com, Go.com, and a couple of things like this, Disney.com, right? So it was just really basic. Let's call them website, right? Maybe at that time. What was it exactly what you were doing, or what was it sort of how Disney looked at it at that time? Looking at now, how that has evolved over the years.
Yeah, you might be surprised. I mean, Disney was actually quite progressive in thinking about ways to use this new technology to build new businesses. So yes, there were the Disney.com and ESPN.com kind of ad-supported websites out there, and Disney acquired some more while I was there. They acquired Family Fun, and we had some movie sites, and so there was that kind of ad-supported business that they wrapped up under this banner of Go.com for a while. But then we also had the Disney Store Online, which is an early e-commerce venture. Okay. There was a subscription service for kids called Disney's Blast or Disney's Daily Blast, which was like way ahead of its time if you're looking back on it, with extremely kind of bandwidth dependent heavy multimedia content, games and interactive video and that kind of thing. That was available on a subscription model. So yeah, we were doing a lot of different things, and learning a lot as we went along.
Yeah. I think we, like everyone else, of course, we all got the buck, and I think at that time TSA was a few years old already, and we had launched TotalSportsAsia.tv, similar, believing there's already content out there which you can put out in a different way, and it didn't last very long. I think we very quickly realized we were just going to burn a lot of money there, and we pulled the plug on it. But obviously, you kept going there, and in your next role there, it was quite interesting with a company called ThinkMap, which I guess was again sort of in the software, but also media and entertainment space. Just talk about that for a minute, because I think it leads into the next one and right after, right?
Yeah. So after London, so I was at Disney in London. I wanted to come back to the States, and I'd become kind of close. And I mean, I always sort of approached these digital businesses, digital media businesses from the business side, I guess. But I was getting closer and closer in my time at Disney to the design process, and working closely with designers on a few projects, and started to develop a real appreciation for design as not just a differentiator, but sort of a strategic imperative for in particular for digital first businesses, and wanted to get closer to that world. And so I took a role, a business development role at a company called Plum Design in New York, which was a boutique web design and development agency that spun out of Razorfish, which was one of the, Razorfish, one of kind of the early large agencies, and just an absolutely phenomenal team that were there at Plum Design at the time. And the company had developed a software product called ThinkMap that they had used on a couple of client implementations that they wanted to commercialize. And so I was brought on to both help bring in new clients into the agency, as well as help to commercialize this software tool.
Interesting. So, so you're in New York at that time, and something then, brought you back to California because you ended up in Berkeley doing an MBA. And focus on entrepreneurship, which of course then leads into that next role there, which we're going to be touching on. So, you just felt you wanted to add the MBA to it, or what was the thinking there? Just going back to California?
Well, it was business school that brought me back to California. That and my wife, my girlfriend at the time. I was not planning to leave the East Coast. I was applying to MBA programs on the East Coast, but my wife, who is from Los Angeles and really wanted to get back to California, basically said, I'm going back. That's where I'll be.
The weather is a little nicer there. Yes, I would agree.
And so I pivoted my plan and applied only to schools on the West Coast, and ended up at Berkeley, which was a terrific place to be for 2 years. And I did focus on entrepreneurship. The Haas School of Business has a fantastic entrepreneurship program. Lots of startups have come out of there, and I chose to use my 2 years of business school starting a company. I actually did two. I did one my first year that never got off the ground really, but was a great learning experience. It was a music startup, and then we with the same team. When it looked like that one wasn't going to work, which was a great lesson. We shifted focus to sports and created Yardbarker. But look, I always tell people that business school is a fantastic time to start a business. You're surrounded by resources. Your students and instructors who all really want to help work on real life projects, not just case studies of things that had happened. And throughout history, and you've already foregone a salary. You've already decided that you're going to spend 2 years, sort of figuring out what's next. And so business school was a fantastic time. My co-founder was a classmate of mine. Our first investor was one of our instructors. We had office space in an incubator that was funded by the school. A few of our classmates were friends and family investors. Like we couldn't have done it certainly as seamlessly if we hadn't been in school at the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point, especially, we have, younger listeners here, how is that rather than just assuming you just go to school, you get a degree and then you find a job, really using that while you're on the ground, as you said, and have all these resources, and especially, of course, in a school like Berkeley there, University of California, that is just, that's amazing. So I love that. I think it's a really nice part to point out. And again, I think I see that, you were the co-founder of the Berkeley's Digital Media and Entertainment Club, which is that all kind of somewhat leads into then really, what Yardbarker was all about. But I just wanted to quickly ask you earlier when you were talking about the first one, which you started, was related to music, I guess you said. What was the part which didn't work, and which you then realized quickly and then, killed it before it, spent too much money on it? What was exactly, maybe the one thing which you would have said?
Oh man, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on this.
Okay,
maybe
give me the short version.
Maybe I'll give it the short version, and then maybe somebody wants to pick up where we left off and do something with it. But we had this idea that we thought that independent musicians didn't have enough options. And remember, this is 2004, 2005, right? So the world has changed since then a lot. Absolutely. But then it really felt like independent artists, and in fact, even major label artists, didn't have access to enough options to finance their careers. And they were very dependent on this kind of major label system, which, everybody knows how challenging that model has been over the years. And for smaller artists in particular, it felt like it just didn't work at all. And so our idea was to come up with a way to securitize the assets that independent artists themselves owned. And the main thing we were looking at was song copyright. Sure. And then sell fractional shares essentially in song copy in the copyrights to songs.
So you were already
as a way
talking
for
blockchain here.
Yeah,
fractional ownership. Blockchain didn't exist even.
Well, yeah, and even things like Kickstarter, right? Like which Kickstarter came along and crowdfunding, no one was talking about crowdfunding of any sort at that time. Right. So I think what did we do wrong? It was just way too complicated. I mean, fractionalizing song copyright ownership, then you're into SEC territory, and it was just too hard. We made it too hard.
But clearly, I mean, as I said, you were way ahead of your time in a sense, because some of that is happening now, right? There are fractional ownerships of IP rights, and whether it's on blockchain or, as you said, in crowdfunding format. So I love that. That's really cool. But like you said, we don't have the time to go too deep. We have too much other exciting stuff to talk about, and that is Yardbarker. So it looks like pretty much right out of the uni. You guys started this, and so talk us through how the company got started, how you, of course, what it was doing, and then we get into, how we eventually, of course, exited and sold it and go from there. But let's really get a good sense of what were you guys actually building and what did you see was missing maybe as an opportunity in the market? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Marcus, this is the best podcast ever. You're just taking me down memory lane, and it seems like
that's what we do.
A lot of it is so long ago, but it's fun to sort of reminisce. When we created Yardbarker as a website. It was a standalone site, which was similar. I don't know if you remember at the time there was a site called Dig. Actually, Dig's still around. digg.com. Mm-hmm. Was this sort of social news aggregator that was changing the way at least a lot of the people that I knew and respected were consuming news, because again, back to the kind of the wisdom of the crowds motif. Dig was using upvotes to determine what news got distributed more than others, and it was a bit revolutionary at the time. Like, what Dig was competing with were just kind of static news websites,
right.
And so our first product was basically just a version of that kind of social news aggregation for sports.
For sports, right.
Yeah, and so we were aggregating all the major sites, but then also while we were doing it, we started to discover that there were many smaller sports sites on the and there's another new term at the time in that Web 2.0 era, that on the long tail of sports news,
right.
That were on sites that no one had ever heard of. But as we started to get to know this content, we started to really respect what a lot of these smaller bloggers were doing. There was this new type of voice in sports media that was less about kind of the professional training and access to athletes and press credentials, and it was less about that and more about speaking about sports in the same language that fans use to talk about sports.
Fan point of view, that's right.
Yeah, and that was becoming more and more popular at the time, and as we saw that, we sort of focused on the sports blogosphere as the kind of content that we wanted to promote, and ultimately built a network of about 1,000 sports blogs that we would aggregate content from, but then also sell advertising on. So we rolled up all of the banner and video ad inventory on all of those 1,000 blogs, and then sold the collective audience to brand advertisers. We were also working with pro athletes at the time to help them create blogs of their own, and a lot of people knew Yardbarker for that. And this is pre-Twitter, right? Pre any direct connection between an athlete and a fan. We were creating these blogs. We weren't the only ones doing it, but we had a bunch. And so the combination of those fan blogs plus the pro athlete blogs plus the sales force that we built to go out and bring in, the Gatorades and Fords and, big brand advertisers to these small sites for the first time. It ended up being quite valuable.
It makes complete sense, and that's always the fun part. Now, if you're looking back now, it all makes complete sense, right? You're going to, how come no one else thought of that? But like you said, at that time, this was still new. Blogging is what's now, what we would call influencers now, or key opinion leaders, KOLs. But at that time, it was still a fairly new thing, and bringing them all together, as you said, almost 1,000 of them. I'm assuming this was heavily U.S. focused, or only U.S. focused, or you did it something around the world already a bit, or what was the audience?
It definitely skewed U.S. Because our sales force was in the U.S.
Right.
And so we were selling the U.S. inventory.
Right, got it. Now, so again, you started it, and I'm assuming initially it is you bootstrapping it, or you raised money right away, or what was the sort of none of these things work without money, right? So tell us a bit about the money side of the business here, or some of the story.
Yeah. So I mentioned that our first investor was one of our instructors. We had office space through the school, and we didn't need to pay ourselves in the early days because we were in school. And so we didn't actually need a lot of money at first. And so we raised $100,000 from just those kind of friends and family. And believe it or not, that $100,000 lasted 18 months.
Wow. That is bootstrapping.
I don't know how we did it, but we did. And then after that kind of first year and a half or so, we brought on an angel investor who joined our board, who was kind of a long-time Silicon Valley venture capitalist who'd recently retired and was doing angel investing on his own. And so we hooked up with him, and he helped us pull together a larger round, about $1 million, which lasted about a year or so. And then from there, and that was when we started to scale the team, kind of professionalize the product a bit more. We landed on a business model during that time. And that put us in a position to be able to go out to VCs and raise a proper Series A. So I think a year after that, we raised $6 million from DFJ, Draper Fisher Jurvetson. And the funding story continues from there. As you know, when you're a CEO of a startup, you're always fundraising,
yes.
always attracting resources of some form or other.
What was the vision at that time? Did you guys sort of saying, okay, let's just make this thing as big as we can, and then someone's going to buy us, or like, well, let's run this for the next 20 years? Was there already a certain thinking in the company, or?
I think that the focus was on growth for sure. It was, let's aggregate as large an audience as possible in order to create real value for brand advertisers. We saw a niche there. Obviously along the way there, we had other kind of M&A conversations that didn't materialize that we took seriously. It's not like we weren't, entertaining those conversations, but it certainly wasn't the goal of the team to quickly sell the company. That those things just kind of came up. It came our way. The goal was always to just get bigger, right. to grow.
How many founders were there at the beginning? What was the sort of size of it? Four
of us.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, which is a lot.
Yeah, and like I said, I think I had an interesting conversation yesterday with someone who invests in startup, and he is a big believer in teams and not in individuals, right? And so that's why I'm curious. So now, let's sort of, the company is doing well. You guys are selling, so you're not just a nice idea, but you are in revenue, right? Generating money. I'm not sure whether it's profitable, because it depends on, I guess, on what you're spending on the other side to do what you're doing. Was the company, making money, as in being profitable, reasonably quickly? Because it seems like you don't really acquiring content, right? It's sort of you aggregating things, someone else is doing, and then you're sharing some of the money you're bringing in. So there should be a margin out there, right?
Certainly there was in some months, and toward the end, we were pretty consistently having profitable months. You're right. The cost structure was not terribly burdensome on the company, other than the revenue share. I mean, our number one cost was the revenue share that we paid out to our partners,
correct.
Right? Because we were essentially an ad network.
That's right.
And we were sharing basically 50-50 with our partners, which, so anytime, you take 50% off gross, like you're dealing with a smaller, sort of revenue pool, which just means that containing costs below the line becomes that much more important.
Correct. But 50% is a decent chunk. I wish I could charge 50% of everything.
It's a lot. Oh, right. Yeah, I guess for an agency, as an agency fee, it's a lot. Yeah. As an ad network fee, it was sort of standard at the time. Okay. The other thing that was common at the time was minimum guarantee payments to publishers. Okay. As an incentive to join the network, because we weren't the only ad network out there trying to get this business. Right. We were the only one that was specializing in sports blogs, but we weren't even the only one that was specializing in sports websites. There were others. So there was competitive pressure on rev share, and on the kind of the incentives to get a big site in particular to sign. And so we had some minimum guarantee payments that were being funded by the venture capital that we raised.
Right.
And that was 2008, early 2008, we raised our Series A. And if you remember what happened in 2008, and then throughout 2009, it was not a good time to be in this kind of business. And, the advertising market dried up. Ad networks, which had been literally trading for $300 million, just because they were ad networks, like a year prior, were suddenly unable to get funded. And so the world really changed in 2008. And that was when we, probably the best entrepreneurial lesson of my life, we were forced to dramatically scale down our burn and prioritize the sites, the partners that were most important to us, and go into survival mode because, we were burning cash, assuming that there'd be another big round of funding available 12 months later. And there wasn't. So we had to make that funding last a lot longer.
The 8 or 9, that was 2 brutal years. I do remember this very well on our side as well. Similar, we were burning, we were doing really well prior to that. And then, as you said, the advertising dollars just dropped out. And that happens when you're in, the part of the industry we were in as well. And so we had 2 years there. We retooled heavily. Now, but that's not about my story here. Now, two last couple of questions before we then move into obviously the Fox part of this story. When you were raising funds, let's say at the peak, what was the sort of valuations you guys were using at that time? What sort of numbers are we talking about here?
Oh God, I'm going to dodge the question, but it's honestly because I can't remember. I don't remember what our valuation was. I don't want to misstate it.
Anything roughly you remember?
In the very early days, I think we raised that $1 million on like 3.5 pre, if I remember right. And then the 6, what was the pre-money on the 6? I can't remember. It was probably some in the range of 20 million, but I can't remember the exact number.
Those are also reasonable numbers, which wouldn't scare anyone too far away from, depending on, what the revenue lines you were already driving at that time. So no, that's cool. Now again, so you're somewhat surviving 2.8 to 9. And then you guys are starting to do more work with other media companies, including Fox, which I guess then leads into an interesting conversation with that group. And who knows, I don't know whether it was also because coming out of maybe, 1 or 2 tough years here, that it all of a sudden looked like being part of something bigger wasn't such a bad idea. What's the story there? How did that all unfold?
Yeah. So we'd had a partnership with Fox, for a couple of years before they bought us. We were actually quite valuable to them. We were I think at the peak, Yardbarker represented over half of the Fox Sports audience.
Wow. Online.
And online, that's right. FoxSports.com or Fox Sports digital audience, as measured by ComScore. And we were growing. And FoxSports.com had a distribution partnership with MSN that represented the majority, the number one source of traffic to FoxSports.com, which was a great kind of fire hose of audience, but it wasn't growing. Right. And so Yardbarker for them became a growth engine, as well as just a significant contributor to their scale. And so, what happened, I mean, the story good is that we had another offer to acquire the business. And we had obviously a great relationship with Fox. The other offer was legitimate and meaningful enough that we had to take it seriously. And we went to Fox and told them, and it would have been the deal would have been kind of mutually exclusive, even with a partnership with Fox Sports. And so I think because we represented such a meaningful share of their audience, and they saw the growth potential, and our teams got along really well at every level: product, editorial, sales. Like, we were working really well together. They decided to buy us instead.
Nice. And now, again, I'll ask the question. I'll let you answer it or not. Was it a good, significant price, and everyone walked away with some good money, or how was the deal structured?
Yeah, look, I won't tell you the sale price, but I will tell you that everybody made a little money. It wasn't for me and my partners. It wasn't retirement money, but it was enough that it felt like it was
worth the effort.
The whole thing had been worth our effort, and I also think that. Again, if there are young entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs listening, I would give this advice, which is your first time. I think a solid single or double is more than enough, and because it sets you up to do bigger and better projects in the future. Yeah. Making a little money, even if it's just a little money, making a little money for investors stays with you, and having the credential of quote unquote successful entrepreneur, having brought a company through every stage of its natural life cycle, including exit, like that stays with you. And so, again, like certainly the deal for me personally and for my partner, like it was more money than I'd ever had in my bank account personally. Yeah. But it wasn't like I didn't have to work again. But it wasn't the money that made it that made it the right choice. Kind of looking back in the rearview mirror, it was everything else that came with selling your company successfully that was more valuable than the money.
Oh, that's great. Now, interesting enough, then, a lot of people obviously, when they sell their companies, they kind of hang around for a little bit and then they're off to the next one, right? Because you kind of caught the entrepreneurial bug, and it's sometimes hard to really go out. In your case, I would say, I guess at least what I can read here is that it's not exactly what happened, right? You spend the next almost 6 years here, right? My math roughly correctly here. Then in the Fox network business, right? First Fox Sports Digital, and then down the line, Fox Sports in the digital space. So you are, I guess, somewhat enjoyed the environment in Fox and what you were able to do there. So, tell me just a quick one on where was that shift of mindset and to be part of this, huge empire, media empire here. And then, of course, a little bit quickly on what we're doing before we head into the world of Activision Blizzard.
Sure. Well, yeah. So I thought that after we sold Yardbarker that I would be off doing my next startup as soon as possible. Right. We had a bit of an earn-out as part of the deal. Yeah. And we fully earned it out, in I think about a year. And so my plan at the time was, okay, let's go earn this out and deliver on the promise we made to Fox, and then I'll go do my next startup. And right. But that never happened. Here we are. That's right. 10 years later, and I'm yet to do another startup, unless you consider what we've done at Activision Blizzard to be a startup, which I actually do, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's a very different environment. Basically what happened was I got sucked into the belly of the corporate beast at Fox, and totally willingly, by the way. It's not. I was no victim. I was enticed by an opportunity that I didn't think would come around again, which was to run digital for a network like Fox that was in the process of launching a new cable network. FS1, Fox Sports 1, was launching, a couple years after the acquisition, and I had a chance to be a part of it and to kind of build the digital strategy that went along with that 24/7 sports network, and I didn't know if that opportunity would ever come again, because I don't know how many, frankly, cable networks are going to launch again.
Right.
And so it was a role that was, of all the roles at a big cable network, television, network like Fox Sports, of all the roles, all the executive roles at a company like that, it was the one that I felt I was qualified for and that I could do. And I running digital, I was able to kind of be a voice in the room of very, very accomplished television executives and producers who I admired and respected very much. But my voice was different, right? Like I had this experience. It was like,
that's right.
Yeah, I was able to be the digital guy, and they needed that, and so it was a good fit, and the way that the business was structured, I still had a bit of autonomy to run digital as a business, and the team that was there was inviting me to build an organization of top class talent, and that's what we did, and I don't regret it at all. I think it was a really valuable time in my career.
Yeah, well, Fox is an exciting company for sure, and I can see that what you call being sucked into it is a good in a good way. That because of the amazing things they do. Now, I want to get into the world of gaming and esports now here, because this is again such an exciting space to talk about. So obviously somehow at the later part of 2016, you were approached or somehow the opportunity came up to join one of the giants in the industry, Activision Blizzard, in a very specific role as the president and CEO of their esports part. What I already know and read about it is, of course, Activision Blizzard, when they started looking at these leagues, they really wanted to follow, I guess, the sports model, right? And maybe was that part of the reason how you ended up with the job, or how did that job came about before we get into what you were doing there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how the job came about. Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, gets credit for the vision for these leagues, which was to, for the first time in the industry, in the esports industry, to design leagues from scratch that would create value in all the ways that traditional sports leagues like the NFL or the NBA create value. And that was by building the kind of ecosystem around the league that you see around the NBA or the NFL, where you've got owners and sponsors and media rights partners and licensees and players kind of all incentivized to grow the league and rowing together in the same direction. Obviously there's conflict among stakeholders, as there always is, but in general, it's in everyone's interest who's affiliated with the NBA to grow the NBA. And that really was missing from esports. There hadn't been this sort of ecosystem approach to building esports leagues. And that was partly because there hadn't been much of an emphasis on commercialization prior to these leagues. Esports has always been viewed, for the most part, there are exceptions, but it has generally been viewed by publishers as marketing for the game.
Right.
And so, things like selling media rights or bringing in, sponsors and focusing on like average revenue per fan, like those kinds of that type of structure just didn't really exist in the space. And so Bobby's thought was, well, the way to bring that structure into the space is to hire people that have worked in that space.
Right. That makes complete sense.
Yeah. And so he hired me, and then I set out to hire a bunch more sports executives.
Yeah, let's get into that because, and I want to start with Overwatch League. At least it looks like on the paper here, this was sort of the first one. Call of Duty came, I guess, a year after, and you joined there, let's say late 2016, and then the first league was 2018. So obviously there was a good year, to build this, set it up, structure it. Bring in the teams, etc. So I'd love to really dig a bit around it, and let me just throw a few things out, and then you pick it up from there. So first of all, let me just, for everyone who doesn't know Activision Blizzard, I believe the company is hitting about $7 billion worth of revenue this year, if I got my numbers right, and is the valuation on NASDAQ is about $67 billion. So we're talking a very large organization here with huge revenue streams and of course some of the biggest game titles out there. Now, if I look again, let's be specific on Overwatch, and then we'll go later to Call of Duty. So 2018, first time the league starts off with 12 teams across, let's say, a bit the world. There were U.S. teams in Europe, Paris, London, and then here in Asia with Seoul and Shanghai. Which then, I guess, the year after increased to 20 teams. Additional teams, I saw quite a few more in China. Certain even second-tier cities, what I would call them there. So you created a regular season. There's prize pool, all this sort of stuff. Again, where does it all start? Just talk us a little bit through, the early days of that league before we getting there. There's some of the numbers which I threw out here.
Yeah, so your timeline is right. I started in fall of 2016, and for the first year, we literally spent the first year in nonstop in boardrooms debating minor structural points. And just until we made it through them all, we're basically creating the charter for the league, and debating what the right rev share structure should be, debating what the right governance structure should be. We had support from a couple of law firms that happened to be the firms that worked most closely with the big sports leagues. And so we had, I'd say, access to answers to the question that always came up, which was like, how do they do it?
Right.
And we like to think that in that first year, we kind of took the best of all of those structures and put them, put them together into something new that was also unique, because esports is unique in a lot of ways from traditional sports. For one thing, the publisher, owns the game, which is different than the NFL. The NFL doesn't own football, right? And so that leads to slightly different design decisions. And so we spent a lot of time kind of going through those kind of finer points of the league structure. We also spent a lot of time on the road meeting with potential owners, because from the beginning, the idea behind the Overwatch League was to create a global city-based league, right. Both of those were firsts, by the way, in esports. There hadn't been.
I was just going to ask. So no one else had done that at that time, right? Okay.
No one else had done that, and so again, credit to Bobby. Bobby's idea was to build a city-based league by working with the best possible owner in each of the cities that we wanted to be in. So we started with a list of the biggest Overwatch cities, basically where our players were concentrated. And then we sort of overlaid that with a list of the best possible owners in each of those cities.
Right.
And then we went out and started talking to them. And, we ended up with, in that first group of 12, I think a fantastic group of owners who represented interests in most of the major sports leagues. And
I think what I saw, you had Kraft, right? Owns Patriot, the Kroenkes there, Arsenal and Rams, and several others, right? So you definitely brought in the big boys. There's no doubt about it. And I'm assuming, as the president, I'm sure you were directly involved in those kind of conversations. How was, convincing an owner of a major, let's call it sporting franchise, whether it's an NFL team or an NBA team or a football club in Europe? Is it easy? You would somewhat assume, because they know the trick, right? And if they have the foresight that these teams could be the next big thing, it might be a really easy conversation. Or is it harder because they don't quite get the world of esports yet?
There was certainly some education involved. I think, but the world had begun to change. In other words, when I started on the job, I noticed there was still a lot of you'd get comments still like, "Whoa, people watch other people play video games? That's crazy!" Like that. You were still hearing that stuff in 2016. Yeah. But then it didn't take long. Like within a few months, or certainly a couple years, that wasn't happening anymore. And I think it was because a lot of more serious investors had started to get involved. I think, I'll humbly suggest that the franchise structure that we created contributed to that, because we were actually kind of positioning, we were selling a real asset, right? Mm-hmm. Like there was a real, we were sharing every dollar of league revenue, and there was exclusivity in the market, and there were commitments to keep the thing going for, a period of time, and there was no relegation, and there was all of this kind of Wild West. That was what we heard all the time. It was like, oh, right. Esports is just the Wild West. I can't invest in that. And so our goal was to address that concern by bringing a structure that would look familiar to the market. Yeah. And I think that was ultimately what got a lot of those investors over the line. Was like they could look at it and say, like, man, I might not totally understand esports, but I understand the business you're creating, and I see how I can create value through this structure. And then we'll learn the esports part.
We'll figure the rest out later. All right, okay. Now let's go a little more again. I just love the numbers, and again, these are obviously things which are written about publicly, which I'm quoting here. So the numbers which is out there is the first franchises were sold about $20 million for a franchise fee, and now some of the newer teams are somewhere around 30 to 50 million US. Those are significant numbers, right? Again, this is serious money, and again, you can correct me if I'm completely wrong there. Now, two questions I have because
I can't confirm or deny that.
Okay, that's fine.
They're not numbers that we've ever published.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they're probably not far off from where it is. Now, maybe it's something you could share with me, because I know the IPL, when the Indian Premier League, cricket was launched, which is again a franchise model which started from scratch, right, and became what it is now. It's a huge multi-billion-dollar industry there. They had a 10-year. The franchise was a 10-year deal, and you paid over 10 years. So it wasn't just give me $20 million up front. And in this case, similar. The largest franchise went for about $100 million at that time. How was it here? Is it you write a check right from the first day, or you pay this over a period of time? I'm assuming the franchise is in perpetuity, or how is that structured?
Yeah, I can't get into the payment structure, but yeah, it is a perpetual franchise kind of partnership or license. And I mean, I can share a little about the economics and kind of how that part works. And, so basically, yeah, there's a franchise fee, as you mentioned, but there's also kind of value going in the other direction as well, right? So there's the league is responsible, and this is similar to a lot of traditional sports. So the league is responsible for the kind of global revenue related to league sponsors, media rights,
yes.
Any sort of content partnership, any licensing partnership, merchandise, that sort of thing. And that, all of that money comes into the league and then is shared with the teams, right? So, and I won't get into the exact splits, but it's the idea is that all the teams get an equal share of that league revenue, and then the teams also have the rights to commercialize their franchise in their local market.
Right.
So the revenue from local ticket sales, from
team sponsorship, right? Yeah, the usual stuff.
Local sponsorship, that kind of thing is sort of comes in at the team level and is kept entirely by the teams. Right.
And there's a number again. What I read was the first season that the total revenue there was almost $200 million for sponsorship and broadcast rights. Again, that's a huge number for a fresh, brand new league in any world, whether it's traditional sports or in this particular case. So, you had big brands like Intel, Toyota, Spotify, T-Mobile. I mean, that's again a very significant number, which is very exciting to see. And of course, that's, shows again the model you guys were building definitely had legs. Can you talk a bit about it? How you then quickly were able to get these sort of blue chip brands and also a significant TV deal, right? I think the media deal was with initially with Twitch, right? Which again, the number thrown around there was 90 million. I couldn't quite figure out that was a 2-year deal, whether that was per year or total. But again, without getting so hung up on the numbers, I'm just throwing them out so people to give a sense of the scale of what you guys built there for overnight. But how did you, as I said, so you got the big team owners in. Now, of course, still convincing advertisers and a media platform to part with their money. That's never easy as well. Talk a bit about it.
Well, but I look, and again, I can't speak to the numbers themselves. But what I'll say is that the story about how we attracted those partners, I think, is actually very similar to the story about how we attracted our owners, which was that we created a structure that was familiar to anyone who'd been investing in traditional sports. But we were able to tell a story about the audience that we were bringing that was very different from anything that they were hearing from any traditional sports league. So, if you're a T-Mobile or a State Farm or, a Coca-Cola, and you're quite used to working with traditional sports leagues, and you really enjoy the structure of being able to, have some entitlement position in along with some, assets that the league brings, either in broadcast or in venue or in social media. But you're looking at the average age of an NFL fan and seeing it climb into the mid-50s, while you're trying to convert or sort of build a loyal, soda drinker in their early 20s. Like in traditional sports, I think, if that trend continues, becomes a less and less efficient way for a brand to reach a young audience. And so we had that story, right? We had the story about the audience demographic, combined with the structure and the way of working with us as a league that they were used to and that they liked. And in a lot of cases, they were the same individuals. I mean, we hired, a sales team that came straight from the NBA and the NFL.
Right. So they knew how to talk the talk.
Well, not only that, they had the relationships. Like they knew these people. I mean, it's not a huge world of sports sponsorship. You need to know how to create value for your brand partners. And I think that's what we did pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I love it. It's just such a great parallel, and that's why we're going in it. So because I want people to understand that part of it. I'm sure not everyone has ever heard this. Now, just a couple other things that I wanted to touch on before we move over to Call of Duty here, and that is the teams, right? So now we 12 to start with, 20 at the end here. There's a prize pool, I think, which grew from 3.5 to 5 million, of course, which means people, the teams winning championships, etc., get a slice of that. Again, anyone who doesn't know what Overwatch is, it's a first-person shooter game. So I believe you have 6 players, right, on each team. So that's correct. And so another thing I read about is sort of the minimum salaries, which again I don't know whether that was you guys set a cap like the way that, you have it in traditional sports as well, or that was sort of more open to the teams how much they wanted to pay, etc. But there was a lot of structure to it, right? There were health benefit, and even I read somewhere there was sort of sort of retirement plan for the players. And so clearly there was you came right away with a lot of details of how this should be structured and how teams should operate, right? Is that all correct?
Yeah, like I said, we spent days locked in a room debating those points, and yeah, it was really important to us to be to bring a kind of a degree of professional operation to the venture that out of the gate would give everyone involved the assurance that we were serious about this and planned to do it for a long time. Obviously, we would learn as we went along, but we wanted to start in a very strong place. And players are one of those stakeholders in the ecosystem that I talked about. So we set a minimum salary, and the league set a minimum salary. All the owners knew that, knew what that was going in. Right. There are no surprises or anything.
Now, the part which I also liked, and again, taking the learnings, I guess, from around the world and other sports, is that you guys are created a league below, right? There's the contender division. It's like a minor league, again, in different parts of the world. You have, teams or leagues in Korea and China and Asia Pacific region, North America, etc. I love this that you guys clearly thought about that there needs to be a feeder system as well, right? It's not just let's have a great league there, but there's nothing below which brings up players and so on, right? So just touch on that for a minute.
Sure. Well, there are many more people playing Overwatch and Call of Duty than will fit into the league at the highest level. Right. So the company thinks about competitive gaming, and I should be clear. I don't know if we were clear that I'm no longer in this role, right. Running Activision Blizzard Esports. Maybe you said that already, but when I was there, right, and the way that and I think the way they still think about it is as sort of a pyramid, where at the top of the pyramid you have the fewest players, but playing at the highest level. And that's the league, right? That's the Overwatch League and the Call of Duty League. But as you go down the pyramid from there are multiple tiers of competitive play. And as you go down each tier, you get more players in that tier. And so you can play Overwatch or Call of Duty competitively, like, unranked. You yourself as a player can be ranked, and you can be matched up with other players in the similar ranks, and you can climb in the ranks and within the game itself. And then there are kind of open tournaments for these games, just as with most competitive games, that anybody can enter. For smaller prizes, but still, like that's where a lot of people get started. And then as they ladder up, there are increasingly structured kind of competitive scenes that we designed to be, as you get closer to the league itself, we designed those tiers to be real like showcases for the best players. And it's tricky to manage those ecosystems for sure. You need to make sure that the incentives are there for the players and the organizations that are, in a lot of cases, kind of hiring the players and it's global, right? So there's a lot to manage, but it's critically important for the longevity of the sport at the highest level, to have people playing and aspiring to play at the highest level, and to make that credibly attainable. And I think that's one of the things that esports has as an advantage over, let's say, the NBA or the NFL, is that I don't have to be 7 feet tall to be good at esports. I don't have to weigh 260 pounds and run a 4.40 to be good at esports. Like, there's no physical pre-qualification. And so it's the case that many people who play these games believe that they have a chance and do frankly have a chance to compete at the highest level.
Right.
And so it's really important that path to pro is there and is clear.
Yeah, no, and I think you guys definitely build that. Now, I wanted to sort of touch a little bit on the Call of Duty League as well, which somewhat I would actually argue Call of Duty is the bigger game, at least in sort of the world I live in here in Asia. Compared to Overwatch, and now and it came a year after, I believe, right? So the franchise model there started 2 years, 2 years after, right? Started 2019. Again, similar 12 teams are there right now, spread somewhat around the world. Similar again, sort of franchise fees model, all that stuff. You got some top teams in there, right? FaZe Clan, I think, as one of them. So did you basically say, look, this model worked already for Overwatch, we're just going to copy and paste it over here? Or what is there a difference in the Call of Duty League, which you could point out?
Well, it's certainly not a copy paste. If I wish it were that easy, but
I'm sure it wasn't. Exactly.
We were right back to the drawing board, having those debates and focused on designing a league that would fit the game and the audience and player base and all those things.
Right.
It turned out that much of the structure translated, and so like the Overwatch League, Call of Duty League is city-based. It's global. Revenue sharing works in basically the same way. Governance works in basically the same way. But the structure we left the structure of the kind of seasons and kind of the formatting of the sport itself completely up to the commissioner of that league and the owners, and working very closely with the game team itself, the team that makes Call of Duty. And so you see things in Call of Duty that you don't see in Overwatch League, like more of a kind of a tier of play that's maybe feels a little more casual than Overwatch League does. In other words, there are more ways to play Call of Duty than there are to play Overwatch, and those range from very hardcore competitive to more casual, like a battle royale mode, let's say, or a mobile version of the game. That maybe, I'm not saying that they're played casually by the best in the world, but my point is there are more people who play the game that way casually, which we felt opened up the sport, the addressable audience of the sport to many, many more people, if we found a way to incorporate those modes into the competitive design of the league. And so you just see that you see a lot more kind of variety in how Call of Duty League operates day to day. And I think you'll see even more of that over time. But yeah, many of the same owners, got involved. It's not entirely the same ownership, but many of the same owners that joined us for Overwatch, also came along for the ride in Call of Duty.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, look, I mean, we as I said, we can keep going on this stuff. It's really a very interesting space, and I'm sure for everyone listening, really learning how these leagues were structured. And of course, Activision Blizzard has many other titles. World of Warcraft. You have Candy Crush and Hearthstone, you name it. And some of them have competitions as well. And I'm going to get to it in a later a bit to compare the leagues versus these major events. When you hear tens of millions of dollars of prize money, because there is a big difference between the two, really. And I wanted to, pick your brain a bit on that side of it there. So I'll kind of start wrapping up a bit the league discussion here. One question is, and again, just reading through some of the commentary this year, obviously 220 the leagues weren't able to play physically as it was previously, so it was mostly mostly all of it online tournaments, and then so it was this whole discussion online about latencies, right? That certain teams might have competitive advantage over others because of that being closer to the server and all this stuff. How did you guys manage to deal with that? This crazy 220, which we're just about to wrap up here this year. And how did it affect what you guys were doing as a league?
Yeah. Well, look, obviously we did not plan for 2020 to go the way that 2020 went. But given the circumstances, I think that the team did an exceptional job of delivering a product that had competitive integrity, entertainment value, and that didn't sacrifice any of the kind of continuity from last season,
right.
Or didn't sacrifice the opportunity or compromise on the opportunity that Call of Duty League had in its inaugural season. We had a few events very early on, January, February,
right.
Before we had to shift everything online. And those events were fantastic. They, I think, showed us and our owners and others, our partners, that there's real demand for seeing these events live. And I think the plan, last time I was at least on the record with this was to be back in front of live audiences as soon as it was, safe and made sense for everybody. Right. That said, they say necessity is the mother of invention, right? And we learned so much this year, not because we wanted to, but because we had to, right. About what's possible with things like online play. The reality is, yes, there are concerns that come up, like the ones you mentioned, but it's perfectly viable to play matches, online with some, with some caveats. Like you do have to be, roughly speaking, on the same continent as your opponent. Right. The closer you are to their time zone, the better. In fact, when we played our Overwatch League grand finals this year, the finals took place in Korea. The teams were separate from each other, and there was certainly no live audience, but both teams were in Korea. Right. In order to kind of minimize the latency issue. But look, the games are also extremely sophisticated themselves at kind of normalizing latency between competitors in a game so that neither has an advantage or disadvantage, at least in theory. Now, some teams are more accustomed to playing with lower or higher latency, and sometimes you can consider that to be an advantage or a disadvantage. But I think this technology is only going to get better. I think what you'll see as a prediction, nothing more, but what you'll see in the future of esports is a good mix of kind of online competition and large in-person audience events to give those fans who for a lot of these fans, like, this isn't just recreation or something they like to watch. It's really their identity, their lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And so they want to be around other people who feel the same way.
Yeah.
And so I think in-person esports is always going to be part of the scene.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've watched some of the videos of some of the events, and the arenas are full, and the fans are as excited as football fans or fans in other sports. So, I love these videos. How the fans always react to the play. What's happening in the game. Now, and that's interesting because. I just wanted to touch on that for a minute. So you have teams, which are all brand new, right? These are franchise teams, to some degree. Maybe there are esports teams behind it, which are known already, because they have multiple teams, maybe in other games as well. But sometimes these are brand new. So from what I can see, again, it's currently still very much driven by the star power of the players, right? They're the well-known guys, right? Who, the legends in the game, etc. Which, again, is not that different in some cases, how traditional sports obviously runs as well. How would you describe that? How do they build these franchises, and, how do these, let's call them star players, kind of move around and, put their stamp on this?
Well, certainly, we're in the era of sports fandom, where players are building direct relationships with fans, and people are following them. In any sport, people are following players as they move from team to team, and that is in effect in the esports world as well. I think, again, I'm not in this role anymore, and so this isn't me commenting on the work I have to do, but more just an opportunity that I think the industry has. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do an even better job of turning players into stars. There aren't as many kind of household names in esports as I think there will be. And I think that's just a matter of time, and also kind of plugging all of the different pieces of the ecosystem together toward that end. In other words, if you think about like what Nike did to create the star that Michael Jordan became, or Michael Jordan's maybe not the best example because he was a huge star regardless of what Nike did, but like Penny Hardaway or right, like there are these other kind of Penny Hardaway was they had to turn him into Nike had to turn him into a cartoon in order to give him a personality, and that made him a star. That made him more of a star than he was. And so I think, like, as sponsors start to get more sophisticated about this, as media partners become more sophisticated about storytelling around the players, and I think just time, general acceptance of professional gaming as a thing in the culture will can create those opportunities for players. Look, Korea is a very interesting case study here because in Korea there's not this there hasn't been the same whatever stigma there is in the West around being a professional gamer. It has never existed in Korea, and as a result, you see professional gamers on the cover of GQ, right? And if you go to an Overwatch League match in Korea, like the girls outnumber the boys in the audience.
Yes.
And
which is in the traditional sport as well. There, actually, I've done a bunch of events there, and it's interesting that the Korean audience especially in sports, has a female. A large female audience there. They love these guys, and they scream too. I'm sure they do the same here.
Yeah, but that's about the players, right? Yeah, more than anything else, they love the players, and so I think, like, one thing that I'm excited to watch in the space is the kind of, call it like a cultural export of that phenomena to the rest of the world from Korea. I mean, Korea's exporting a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah.
K-pop is massive
huge.
globally. Right. There's the best picture winner, was it last year? Parasite was a Korean film. Like, there's a lot of Korean culture being exported globally. I think the Korean approach to esports can be exported to great effect, and that's where you'll start to see more of that star power created, I believe.
And that's actually interesting. There's again things I was reading when you guys had your first deal with Twitch. I know now I think most of the product from the company is on YouTube, but at that time, what I really loved is, and again, this is why I want to bring it up to learn for everyone, is, Twitch then created private chat rooms, with the players. You had, even you could talk to the officials. There were also different camera angles you could choose. So again, they created, and I believe they created this sort of all access pass for the fans to watch, and obviously that's how they monetized it. Again, some of it happens in the traditional world of sports as well, but not really quite there yet. And this interactivity with the stars, right? Whether they stream in their own, let's call it spare time, or while they're training and practicing, or of course, some are now full-time streamers. They don't even play, let's say, competitively anymore. If you take Ninja or someone like that, and obviously making huge money on the back of it. That's where I feel traditional sports hasn't really grasped that opportunity yet. It's really still much more about just the game itself. That 90 minutes, that 3 hours, whatever it is, on the Saturday, Sunday versus. In esports and in gaming, it never stops. It literally is all day, all night long, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, other sports like to say that there's no off season, but there's really no off season in this stuff.
Yes, right? Correct.
Like there's something going on at all times. That's a big opportunity too. And like, look, the traditional sports metaphor was a really good place for us to start, I believe, because of the way that it brought serious investors. And when I say investor, I mean anybody that's investing time or money or partnership into the space. Like, the traditional sports model unlocked that. And that created a lot of value. It was a great place for us to start, but it can't be the whole story. Like, the esports can't get itself locked into that traditional sports model too literally, or it will miss a big opportunity to engage fans all day, every day, like you're describing, which is an opportunity that traditional sports don't have.
Correct.
So I think like laying the foundation to kind of make this look like an attractive investment was, I believe, the right move, but it can't be the only move.
And it's interesting. I want to quote someone else, Jens Hilgers. I don't know if you recognize his name. I know he's one of the founders of ESL, of course, and now runs the Bitcraft Ventures, which is at 160 million, fairly highly powered private equity fund there. And he actually quoted, this was a German podcast I was listening to, and he basically said he believes traditional sports can learn more from esports than the other way around. And I think that's a bit what you're saying. Maybe initially it made sense to look at it, follow certain structures. But I do believe, and the more every day I learn about, this world here is, it is somewhat the other way around. I think traditional sports can learn a ton of things from gaming and esports, how it structures it, and how the monetization part is so different. So it's an exciting space, I think, for everyone there.
It's a dance, like we got to dance together. And I think that's kind of what makes it fun. And, there's so many sports executives like myself that made the jump over to esports, and, we're able to add value right away because we spent our career doing this, and it was missing from esports. But I agree with Jens. I think in terms of like, esports has so many things that traditional sports wishes it had. The audience, the digital native nature of the product, and the digital native nature of the audience. I mentioned the youth of the audience, but also the global nature of the game. of a lot of these games. Like young, global, and digital native are the three things that every sports league wishes it was.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, the audience is amazing, and clearly that's where everyone's going after, Generation Z here. Now, I want to slowly wrap this up because I know it's also getting late there for you. Really appreciate all this sharing, Pete. And I know we can't really talk that much about your current role within Activision Blizzard. We maybe have to leave that for another day, another conversation once you can share some of the new ventures you're working on there. I guess as sort of an entrepreneur in residence role there. So I want to wrap it up with another sort of little quick comparison here. And that is, the leagues, of course, as we talked about earlier, there's prize money and also there's revenue share models, etc. And then you have these mega events, and again, of course, Activision Blizzard has some of them too in your big titles. But the biggest really are not necessarily your own titles, but anyway, we can have maybe chat about it in a general sense, right? So we have Dota 2 with $40 million there for the international Fortnite, $15-20 million prize pools. Total, supposedly what I read last year was $64 million, which across multiple of their events. Those are huge numbers, in any, even compared, of course, again, to traditional sport. I think the only one which came close in total prize pool was the U.S. Open. And even there, the winner, of the U.S. Open tennis, was similar to the winner of Fortnite there with, 3 million plus. Let's besides putting these numbers out, which again many people might have seen and read about, but the part which I thought is interesting, obviously, how those numbers are generated, right? And maybe you guys do the same thing as well. It isn't just the publisher or the developer writing a very large check. It is self-generated, right, through passes and other ways and means. So, talk us through that a little bit, how that works, and how the fans are really driving these numbers up on their own, in a sense, right?
Yeah, look, the one that most people look at because the numbers are so outrageously large to a lot of people is Dota. Right. And Dota's a game that's very competitive game, has people playing at the highest levels, and they have an event once a year that they call the International. Yep. That usually has a prize pool in the, kind of mid tens of millions of dollars, which is a huge number, right? Yep. As you say, like you can compare that to any traditional sport prize pool that you want, and it's going to stack up pretty nicely. But what people have to understand about Dota is, one, like this is basically that game's business model, to kind of to sell a product that they call the compendium, which is it's sort of a bundle of digital content, a lot of digital content, and kind of special streaming access to the tournaments. Yep. And their kind of promise to their customers is that when you buy the compendium, half of the money you're spending is going to go into the prize pool, and therefore go straight to the best players in the world. Right. And so the phenomena is that even though Dota is published by a big company that makes a lot of money, the fans still kind of feel like they're participating in the scene and in the development of the scene, and it's really important to point out that they're getting a lot of value in the form of digital content in return, and so it's not just that they're paying that money to watch the matches. That's not right. They can watch it for free on Twitch. Yeah. They're paying for that content, right. And the players are benefiting. It's a good model.
Yeah, I love it.
But as I said before, this is the entire. It's really the business model for the game. Like they basically put their whole monetization program into this tentpole event. for the most part.
Yeah, and exactly, and that's interesting because is again very different model than what we were just talking about earlier with what you guys are doing with the league. So there are different models out there, and I think the point you just said is what I want to highlight is that the fans really feel they are directly engaged with it, and they see where their money is going. Right now, let's think traditional sports. Clearly, the salaries of a player, of the coach, and why these teams exist in traditional is the same thing, right? Is the fans' money, right? And whether they're paying the ticket to watch it or they're paying B Sky B, $200 to have the box there. It is still the fan. It's always the fans' money, right? To some degree, there's of course sponsors.
It's somehow different though.
Correct. That was the point I was going to point out. Exactly. There is a difference, right?
I think it's because, look, I've been following both of these worlds now for a while, and I think traditional sports athletes, players, stars are getting better at this. Okay, so I think the trend is moving in the right direction, but for a long time, these players really felt untouchable. They felt like completely separate from the fans. They kept themselves separate from the fans. They come and sign autographs and they do commercials and stuff, but
you play the short game, right? You shorten the supply to increase the demand to some degree. That's really what sport did for a long time, right?
You're right. You're absolutely right. Like put these players on a pedestal, make them, superhuman, and people will want to come watch them. Well, that was true, and the short game worked, but what it didn't do is develop any level of relationship. Like real relationship between players and fans. And, going back to Yardbarker, we did that with the blogs, but and then Twitter kind of changed things even more, and then YouTube, and then I think more and more sophisticated players, especially ones that are coming up in the generation where they don't remember the life before the internet, are doing a better and better job of this. But it's not like gamers. Like gamers literally, they stream their practice.
Exactly.
Right? and they talk to their fans on the chat. Like they use these same tools that the fans use. Right. They're just better at the game. And so when a Dota player or an Overwatch player or a Call of Duty player makes it to the highest level, like they've got this group that's been with them for so long, and those fans are not just like picking a favorite player and saying, "Oh, I like that guy because whatever, he hits a lot of home runs." Like they
grew up with him.
Rooting for their friends. They're rooting for their friends. Yeah. The fan community, I can see that in gaming is, or in esports also is huge, and I love that how that's built. I mean, my son was telling me the other day that he was watching a movie with one of the gamers, right? So they, this is on Twitch, of course. They stream it at the same time. The movies from Amazon, and they're just sitting there as a community watching a movie together. I was just, can you imagine a sports star doing that? And maybe they will eventually, right? I'm sure, as usual, as I said, that's where the learning really, and this is what these podcasts are really to some degree all about. I want to highlight these differences, and at the same time where both parts can learn from each other and hopefully together become better, in the next 10 years here. So, Pete, this was awesome. We can go on forever, but we also play the short game. We want to leave people hanging with a little more to come for next time. Cool. And so thank you so much for your time there. Have a great day in Utah. And there should be some nice snow, I guess, if it's not already there soon there. So enjoy the skiing and happy holidays. And we'll talk again soon, hopefully. All right, Marcus, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your time as well. And, I guess just if anybody wants to continue the conversation, I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter. So that's where I'll leave it, I guess.
Yeah, Twitter, or I guess I found you on LinkedIn. And get in touch with Pete, exactly, if you want to hear some more about this. And I'm certain we will talk some more soon, too.
I'd enjoy that. Thanks a lot, Marcus.
Definitely. Happy holidays. Cheers.
You too.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer Podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution